Great innovation stories make change possible. Each week on the Innovation Storytellers podcast, I invite innovation leaders to share how they overcame the obstacles to introduce breakthrough ideas to the world through the power of story. I'm featuring guests from Tesla, TD Ameritrade, Corning, Cisco, Bloomberg, and so many more. Listen in to learn how you can tell a more effective innovation story and change the future for the better. Hi, everybody. I'm your host, Susan Linder, here at Innovation Storytellers. And today's kind of a special day. Today is our Deja Vu Day. We are very, very lucky to have a repeat performance by the incredible associate partner at Strategyzer, but also super amazing author. And we're going to dive into Tendayi's book a little bit deeper, but about being a pirate in the Navy. But before I dive in and actually let you hear Tendayi's brilliant words of wisdom, I'm just going to share with you a little bit about Tendayi's background. If you don't recall from episode 1, please go back and listen, because this conversation is going to illuminate further some of the details that we weren't able to get to in our first conversation together. So Tendayi is an associate partner at Strategyzer, as I mentioned, where he helps large companies to innovate for the future while running their core businesses. He was previously director of product lifecycle at Pearson, a FTSE 100 global education company, where he co-designed and helped implement the company's product lifecycle, which is an innovation framework that won Best Innovation Program in 2015 at the Corporate Entrepreneur Awards in New York, my hometown. Tendayi also has a PhD in psychology and an MBA, so he can tell us what's wrong with our brains while we're trying to innovate on a day-to-day basis. And he has also written 3 books, not just Pirates in the Navy, but also The Corporate Startup and The Lean Product Lifecycle, which are our Bibles, really, for how we get innovation done in the corporate world. He's also a regular contributor to Forbes magazine if you need to pick up a daily or a weekly dose of Tendayi, not to mention his blog, which I think is pretty fantastic. So without further ado, Tendayi, thank you so much for coming back on Innovation Storytellers.
Yeah, thanks for having me back. Always awesome to be having a conversation with you.
Well, we expect to be fully analyzed, in depth, Dr. Viki, by the end of this conversation. And hopefully you'll be able to diagnose what ails us about our innovation processes along the way. We intend to have a miracle healing right here on this show.
Right.
So let's back up for just a little bit, because as we mentioned in the previous show, just give people one more time a little bit of your background. Now, I've shared your professional background, but your life started in Zimbabwe, right? Not in the heart of the UK, but rather in very southern Africa, one of the most beautiful countries in the world, I think. Tell us about their transition of being born in Zimbabwe and then making your way to the UK and then eventually into this journey into innovation. How did you get there?
Yeah, I mean, it's a interesting kind of long and winding road. The joke about my career is it's better to be lucky than good sometimes, because it's just a series of coincidences that kind of got me to where I was. I mean, I was in Zimbabwe growing up, born and raised, even did my undergraduate degree here at the University of Zimbabwe, my psychology degree.
So you're a city kid or a country kid?
I was a city kid. So I'm a proper city kid. I was a country kid. I'm scared of cattle. So it's
too many trees, too many animals, too much nature.
Too many animals. Yeah, exactly. I'm even scared of horses. I'm actually scared of horses. So I was a proper city kid. Got into hip hop in the early days. Recorded a couple of albums with my friends.
Okay, we have to stop here for a second so that our listeners know that Tendayi and I share a deep love of hip hop. I confessed before hitting the record button that I was a hip hop DJ back in 1989 in university.
Right.
And Tendayi confessed to me that you were a hip hop artist. You recorded 2 albums.
Yeah.
Do you want to spit some rhymes for us right now, Tendayi?
No, not really.
Maybe as we get to our second cup of coffee, we'll create an innovation rap by the time this recording is over.
Possibly. But we also want to keep the audience engaged. So I'm not going to.
By the way, listeners, there will be links in the show notes to Tendayi's music if we can find them. Yes.
I'm going to hide all those links. So So it's just growing up. And then after university here, I managed to get a full scholarship, a full ride to go do a master's and a PhD in the UK. And that was effectively the transition out of Africa. And then when I got to the UK, I managed to get a role as a assistant professor. That's what they're called in the US, right? A lecturer at the University of Kent. And while at the University of Kent doing my teaching, I managed to get a fellowship to Stanford. Yeah, that little school.
That
so
little
it was while I was
school with no innovation track record whatsoever. That's
exactly. That's where I caught the innovation bug at Stanford.
Wait, something intrigued you to actually apply for the fellowship. Was it just a desire to get to sunny California, or were you intrigued at this point as part of your studies in innovation?
I wish I was. I didn't even know. This is how bad it is. I was such a Zimbabwean kid.
What does that mean?
I didn't know Stanford was in Silicon Valley at all. Like, I never even made the connection. I just had a really great colleague that I was working with on research there. And then I got there, I was like, oh, right, this is where like Google is headquartered. And then I just started.
Is that Stanford, Connecticut? It's Stanford, California? No, very close.
I'm dead serious. Like, I was that ignorant on all. But then being at your Stanford Graduate Business School, the D School, right, at Stanford, just hanging out in that context completely flipped my mindset. So,
sorry, for our listeners in Vietnam, what's the D School?
Oh, that's the design school. It's set up by the guys who set up IDEO, right? They're the same ones that Stanford D School. So just like learning about design thinking and working with those folks. I mean, I didn't work with them directly. I was just hanging around. Steve Blank, who's the father of the Lean Startup, he used to have a weekly session where he brought in entrepreneurs and he would interview them. I used to go there religiously and just like watch it, Mark Andreessen and the lady who started SlideShare. It was just like all this really cool stuff that was just happening all the time. And that's what really got me hooked. So that's where the pivot started. Like, I got back to my old job and I wasn't really enjoying it that much. That's when I did the MBA, because I thought you need business language to be an innovator.
I'm going to spend a year in fellowship at Stanford listening to all these entrepreneurs, and I'm going to do academia.
Exactly.
Part of innovation, right? Academia.
Yeah. Not very smart choices. But after that, I started working with startups, getting involved in startup innovation labs, which led me all the way to Pearson, where I ended up working there for a few years as director of product lifecycle. So that's the journey, basically. Yeah. And now I'm back in Zimbabwe. That's where I live and work now. So it's pretty cool.
You're back in Zimbabwe?
Yeah, right now. Like, that's Zimbabwe out there.
I thought that was Kent out your window. That's Zimbabwe out your window.
That's Zimbabwe, yeah. That's Zimbabwe.
Just to put us in a particular time and context, COVID in Zimbabwe, what's happening in where you are in the moment? Because very few people have an eye on that.
So, I mean, I've only been back for 6 months. So the majority of the COVID time I was in the UK. But yeah, same thing, lockdowns. My kids are at home right now. They're learning from home.
They're in British school on Zoom in Zimbabwe?
No. In Zimbabwe, school on Zoom in Zimbabwe, which is...
Okay, got it. I'm trying to make this way more complicated than it needs to be.
Exactly. No. So, but yeah, with the Omicron variant, there's a big surge, which is not going to stabilize and starting to go down. So we are anticipating that the kids will be back in school in the next couple of weeks. And then things will start to return back to pseudo-normal, right? What's normal these days? Yeah.
And people are getting vaccinated in Zimbabwe. They're finding...
Yeah, people are getting vaccinated. I mean, the pace is not as fast as Western countries because, of course, supplies of vaccination out here are not as great in poorer countries. But I've been double jabbed here. So it's pretty cool.
And are you planning in staying in Zimbabwe for a while, or are you on kind of a retreat from...
No. I mean,
world as it all falls around you.
No, I'm planning to be here for quite a while. I'd like my children, because then they're teenagers now, to finish out the rest of their school here if possible, so that they can go back out into the world. Just want to ground them a bit in who they are, just give them that little bit of identity. And then they can, again, roots and wings, as we say. Give them roots and wings, and then they can fly away again. So pretty deliberate kind of move to come home.
Wow. And so you and I both know that the speaking circuit at large conferences is not what it used to be in the times pre-COVID. So it's not like you have to get on a plane and suddenly fly for 12 hours in order to get to your next speaking engagement, because everything is over Zoom anyway.
Yeah, so here's the interesting thing about that. So Strategyzer, the company where I work, is a fully distributed company. So not a single one of us are in the same country. Some are in Poland, some are in Australia, some are in South Africa. We've got a team in Canada, Switzerland. We're a fully globally distributed company. Over 50 of us, just all globally distributed. We only work online. And when COVID hit, because I was doing a lot of speaking and traveling, I figured out a way to do all the work now virtually, do all the presentations virtually. And I was literally in the UK, in the cold, with my family, working in my home office. And I turned around to my wife and I said, like, if we can live anywhere in the world, like, why are we here? Like, if I can like be anywhere in the world I want, why am I not in the Bahamas or just back home, right, closer to family and living a family-based life? And so that's without COVID, I would not have moved because I'd be on a plane to somewhere right now. And so that, yeah.
Oh, that's pretty amazing. So this transition, so can we just talk a little bit about process innovation inside of large companies? So creating processes inside of companies by itself sounds pretty boring, right? I mean, we're just figuring out how to get a great innovative idea from point A to point B. But we have a lot of product managers who come on the show and tell us how they got the product from start to finish line. But there's a process that needs to be laid down first in order for that. I'm thinking about like a toboggan to get easily down that beautiful slide, right? And out to market. So you specialize in helping large companies create that process, refine and improve that process. So take us from the top just for a minute in thinking about that process. How do you do it if you're a new innovation manager or someone who's been in an innovation role, but things aren't moving as smoothly as you would like? How do you start them, Tendayi? Where does the process start?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that are philosophical first. And one of the philosophies that's really important for us at Strategyzer is this notion that the tools we use in our work are not neutral.
Are not neutral?
Yes. So the tools that we actually use in our day-to-day work are not neutral. Tools are often an instantiation of a belief system. The things we believe are best practice around a particular topic got expressed into the tool that we use, whether it's a spreadsheet, whether it's Oracle, whether it's Plan View, whatever it is that the organization is using to direct work. And some of the things we now start to treat them like the air we breathe. Like we don't even they're just around and we treat them as like constraints that we have to sort of live with. But actually, all of those things were created by human beings. And the human beings that created those things and created the training decks to help you learn how to do those things, then created the rules about how you get funding for your project, who gets to make a decision, which IT platform do you use to test your product before it goes out into the world. All of those are decisions made by human beings. And so we really believe that tools are not neutral. Tools are an expression of some thought. And if we dig deep into the thought that created the tool, we can challenge the thought, therefore challenge the tool.
Right? So sometimes you're really upending things really from ground level, right? I mean, I'm hearing you talk, but the anthropologist in me is thinking, well, this is the same with social structures, right? This is the same conversation we have about all the isms in our life. Capitalism, classism, sexism, racism, like they're all isms, but we made them. They didn't fall from the sky, right?
Yeah.
They're all the things. So I guess innovationism starts with a certain construct and belief system about how new things come into the world.
Exactly. Well, whatever version of innovationism you have in your organization.
You're going to just make up words here, Tendayi.
Exactly. Whatever version of innovationism you have in your organization is an expression of how those people think that things work. So if you listen to a leader and he goes, I want to make 2 large bets, and those large bets are going to be how we're going to transform this company. They believe in that statement that they can pick the winning idea on day one. Right? They believe that they know what a good bet is, or someone bring me a 10x idea. They believe that when they see a 10x idea, they'll know it. And how do they know it's a 10x idea? Because one of their employees made it look like a 10x idea in the slide deck or in the spreadsheet or in whatever tool that they use to make decisions, right? But we know all the research in the world knows, great book by Adam Grant called Originals, details all the research that shows that the best way to have good ideas is to have loads of ideas.
The best way to have good ideas is to have loads of ideas.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
That's an innovation principle. It's an infallible principle.
Does that also then apply that there's not one innovator, but rather there's a team of innovators? Like we often fall into this myth of like the lone Steve Jobs, the one Bill Gates, the one Sergey and his counterpart, might have been the exception. But do we always want to believe in the one hero too, with the one idea that changed the world?
Yeah. So the one idea, the mythical hero, that's another belief there, right? That innovation succeeds because there's a passionate person pushing it through. But actually the truth, especially in corporate context, is that innovation succeeds through collaboration across functions. It's impossible to take anything out into the world in a large company without collaborating with other functions.
Right.
The process is too variegated and involved, right? That's a quote directly from, what's his name, man? I forget his name. Maybe you could put it in the link. The guy who wrote the book about Bell Labs, the Idea Factory. I think his name is John Gertner. He says, like, it's impossible for an innovation to succeed on its own. The phrase he uses is too variegated and involved. Too many people have to touch an idea to make it go out into the world and breathe. But that's a different thing. That's a different belief system that you have to deal with in a different thing. Just to address the first belief system, which is you can choose the winner on day one. Well, actually, the best way to find good ideas is to have loads of ideas, which ultimately means that the best way to find the 10x idea is to make multiple small bets, let those teams work, experiment, test, whatever they're doing. And then it's up to you to see which of those small bets you've made actually showing traction and potential. Then you double down your bets on those things that are showing traction, and you shut down the things that are not and allow those teams to start working on other things. And then over time, you increase investment in those things that keep showing traction until you find your 10x idea. So the process of finding great music is to have the artist go to studio and record 50 songs, and you pick the 10 that end up on the album. The process of finding a best-selling book is to sign 20 authors, launch 20 books, and only 2 of those will be runaway successes. The process of finding great movies is to record or whatever, launch 20 movies a year, and you'll have 2 blockbusters. It's anything that involves any creativity or putting something new into the world. It's the process of actually hit and miss. But it's also a systematic process. You don't have to blow the company or bet the company on any one of those things. You can start to make systematic processes. So then the question then becomes, okay, we have this principle that tells us that you have to make multiple bets that increase over time when something shows traction. Once we have the principle, then we're going to have the conversation. What is the right toolbox to drive that process? What is the right toolbox that is an expression of that principle? How does the company get to manifest the principle in the ways of working it creates for its team? Which is a different question to, well, here you have to submit a 30-page business case before we invest in anything. And that's what we do here. So it doesn't matter what the principle is. We're using this business case thing, which is an expression of a completely different principle, to try and drive something that only succeeds on the basis of a different set of principles. And those are the conversations that you're constantly having to have in organizations to tell them that it's not that your innovation process or your business management processes came down from the mountains as rules. They weren't written on a piece of stone as like laws. You created them as an instantiation of something, expression of something, and they can be changed and evolved as the world changes around you.
Wow. And so how hard is it, Tendayi, to get people to rip out the old tools and say, it's time to go back to Home Depot and pick out time to fill up a whole new toolbox, because the ones that you're working with, frankly, aren't going to build the house of the future. You're still building this log cabin as opposed to seeing this incredible 10x structure that you're trying to build.
Yeah. So this was my false belief when I first started doing my work, was you just need to talk to people. Like, you just show them that they're wrong and they'll accept it. And it's just like,
that always works with my kids. I just keep telling them you're doing it wrong. And then they go, yes, Mom, thank you.
Thank you for that.
Entirely. Yes. And here's a present.
Thank you. Yeah. With my $500,000 a year in salary, I'm going to listen to you because, and so it was, so that was tough at the beginning. I remember flaming out of a lot of conversations. And then I remember doing one workshop at Pearson where I was literally like taking this mocking stance going, you think you're in publishing, but you're not in publishing. Like the world is changing around you and all those publishers there, and they were just like throwing stones at me. And I came out of there and it was like a huge fight. And I felt vindicated that I told them, but they didn't want to do anything that I said. So it didn't really matter that I told them. And then I remember one of them pulling me aside and saying to me, I completely agree with everything you said, but I hate how you made me feel.
Ooh, you got some Maya Angelou working on you right there.
Right? Like he pulled it was a gut punch, right? And I was just like, yeah, that actually makes sense. Like,
wait a minute, sorry. This is the PhD in psychology was getting
I know
feeling from your client, from your coworker.
Right? Yeah. Talk about forgetting, because you're so involved in this belief system that you're kind of building. So the first thing you have to embrace is that within large companies and within any organization, within any movement, people have the right to disagree with you. But people have the right to take different points of view, because in certain situations, big bets succeed.
That's true.
Right? And maybe they've made a couple of big bets before, and that's how they got to where they were. So for you to tell them that they have to make multiple small bets, maybe that doesn't work for them, or they think that doesn't work for them. And so embracing the idea that people are allowed to disagree with you made me take a different stance, which is stop focusing on your detractors so much. Right? The first thing you do in your movement is to find detractors and start preaching at them.
This is something that we talk about a lot here on Innovation Storytellers is, we look at the framework of how we actually tell a story, how you engage the listener. And the first thing we do is we talk about having a shared history. What is the background that you and I both come from that we can find common ground? Because if we can't get the common ground, then we're screwed. The next step is then figuring out what are the core values that you and I both share in this process of innovation. What are the company's core values? And also, what are the values that we need to leave behind that we've been clinging to that don't serve the innovation process? So this shifting of values, and I often use the prophets as an example of the shift of values. What does it mean to go from an eye for an eye to turn the other cheek? What does that shift in values mean when you're trying to take people on a journey into a future that they can't see?
Yeah.
And so that shift in values is really important. And the next thing that you need, though, is a band of 12 apostles. You need, if you're the Buddha, you need a Sangha, you need a community of people who are going to take the idea first inside, because it makes them feel a certain way, to your point. And the second is they can see the future in their own lives, and now they want to tell the world. So we need early adopters as part of spreading the gospel of innovation, just as much as the idea, the product, the service, et cetera. We need the gang of 12, for lack of a better term, to figure out how we're going to move the word around the world, and with it, the product or service that comes with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was like the biggest. Yep. And that was the biggest insight that hit me in this work, which is somehow the human psyche, because maybe we're kind of evolved for sensing danger, we really pay attention to detractors and we want to convince detractors, but actually there's more safety in being with early adopters. There's also another element of storytelling which is interesting, which is, and I think I say this in the first episode, which is stories resonate when people can see themselves in the heroes of those stories, when they can relate to the heroes, right? There's a lot of resonance in stories where people can see themselves in the story. So at the beginning of like my process, I would talk a lot about Google and Facebook and Amazon and how great those are. And And people at Pearson can't relate to that. And, it's just like, but we're not Google and we're not Amazon. But those
You're
are
like,
the
but I
hero
was at
stories of,
Stanford. Come on.
but I was at Stanford. You got to listen to me, right? But they can't see themselves in those stories. So in the process of finding those 12 disciples, like you're saying, and finding those early adopters, the ones you want are the ones that are similar to the people you're going to try and influence.
That's right.
And then as you get early wins with those folks, they're the ones that say, I've been saved. I had this problem like you have. And I used this process to get to the. So you're just like standing behind your speaking, but you're telling stories that are internal. And if those internal successes can tell their own stories, that's even better. And I find that that's much more attractive. And so the fundamental question that I ask every team I work with now is, who are the early adopter leaders in your organization? That you go to most companies and there's leaders that have been to the Lean Startup Conference, that have gone to a Silicon Valley tour or something, and they're trying to figure out how to make innovation work, and they just haven't cracked it yet. And those are the people you work with first. And you ignore the detractors. But the process that you then need to follow is this ability to celebrate any wins you have with those folks publicly within the organization. So it's like, I often tell innovators that you're not like a used car salesperson or like a window salesperson, like cold calling people and asking them to join your movement. What you really need to do is to create gravity towards what you're trying to do. And you create that gravity by telling internal success stories, not external success stories, but internal success stories too within that organization. And that's what I have found works. To convince people without making them think that they're being convinced. Yeah.
Hey, it's Susan here. Like what you're hearing so far? Make sure you never miss an episode by clicking the subscribe button now. This podcast is made possible by listeners like you. So thank you for being here. Whether it's your first time or you're 10 episodes deep, if you want to learn more about me and the work that I do with innovation leaders, head over to susanlindner.com for more information. I'm always open to a conversation to learn how I might better support you. But for right now, let's get back to the show.
Yeah. And we often say on this show is you have to make people feel that they will become the hero in their own story as a result of saying yes to this unseen future. So that suddenly there will be a transformative opportunity, whether it's career or personal, that says, if I follow this path into this unknown future, life will get better for me and for everyone. That process takes baby steps. Most of us don't have a conversion experience where we see God and suddenly it's hallelujah. It's prove it to me. And if you read, as most of my listeners know, I was a double major in anthropology and comparative religion. And so this way that prophets spoke fascinated me because I was always dumbfounded as how these leaders who painted a picture of a future we couldn't see got so many people to follow them. And thousands, literally thousands of years later, we're still telling these stories. And how do innovation leaders get people hooked on an idea of a product or service they can't see and yet get people to join and say, I believe.
Yes.
I believe. I believe in something I can't see yet. One of the greatest mind-blowing events I had in innovation was going to Northrop Grumman and watching them build a satellite that was not going to be launched for another 35 years. And I said, how does that work? Like, I can't even imagine some product cycles you work with companies. It's 1 year, 6 month, 2 year turnaround, right? Maybe 5 years. And 35 years, he said, some of the materials, like the base materials to build the satellite have not yet been invented. We don't have the polymers. We don't have the metals. We don't have the coatings. We don't actually know how that metal or that plastic or that material will even be created 35 years from now. But we have faith that as we go along in the innovation process, some physicist, chemist will wind up figuring out how to make a piece of metal that can withstand 1,000,000 degrees below Celsius, whatever that number was.
Yeah.
And when you think about it in terms of innovation, right, it's been 115 years since Orville and Wilbur Wright, two bicycle repairmen, figured out how to build an airplane. And 115 years later, we have private space travel.
Yeah.
Right. So here are these bicycle repairmen building aviation. And now we're 115 years later, they couldn't certainly foresee that,
Right.
but it's that same mindset in innovation that says there's a level of faith involved in innovation that we don't really talk about in the halls of the corporation, of how we get people to come along on the journey that will build great things that they never even thought possible.
Exactly. It's always a leap of faith. And making that leap of faith is a form of belief. And you cannot lecture people into taking a leap of faith.
So you changed your evil ways, Tendayi? Is that what we're
changed my evil ways? I changed my evil ways to better storytelling. And storytelling that doesn't involve me as the hero. I'm more like Yoda, right? I'm more in the background, kind of just like mentoring the heroes, right? And so I think that became really essential, right? Taking myself away from this feeling that I'm the central character to the success of this process, and just allowing people to sort of evolve and learn and master the process for themselves.
Yes. As the innovator, we are not the hero, right? Oftentimes we're the prophet bringing the idea, but it's actually all of those people who enact it, who carried it out, are the heroes. And more consequentially, let's move the conversation one step further to the customer actually being the hero. Can you talk about when you're creating these processes for large corporations, at what point does the customer voice, as the real hero of the story, get involved in the innovation journey?
Right. So I love that question because it takes us back to another set of first principles that I'm having conversations with them about all the time. So a lot of conversations around innovation, they focus on technology a lot. So we'll talk about blockchain and AI and crypto. And so people are constantly referring to all these breakthrough, groundbreaking technologies and products. And so what happens is a lot of organizations really, when they talk about innovation, really think about technology and products. And the hardest lesson that I sometimes have to kind of work on them is to actually say, like, that's actually irrelevant. Like, nobody cares about your technology.
Yes.
Nobody cares about your product. Nobody cares. What people care about are the problems and challenges they're facing in their lives and how to solve those. So your job is to create value propositions that resonate with customers. Job one. So the question is, can you leverage that technology to create a value proposition? And I even have a slide which says technology is not equal to value proposition.
That's right.
Right? Technology is not the same as a value proposition. And value proposition is how the technology is leveraged to solve problems in people's lives. And so the value of having breakthrough technologies is you've figured out a quicker, faster, more efficient way to solve people's problems. Right? If this technology is just interesting because it's interesting, you can have that conversation with your R&D colleagues and write papers. I worked with a museum that I won't name because of problems with the non-disclosure stuff that I've signed. But I worked with a museum, and you know when you go to a museum and you're walking around and all the artifacts look all beautiful, but you have no clue what it is? There are those situations where you're looking at the thing and you're like, what is this?
What is that?
Yeah, exactly. And so when I was with them, I found out why. Because all the curators are academics. So when they do their curation, they're not doing it for the audience. They're doing it for other curators. So they can win curation awards and present it to conferences and all this. I just want to think of like a big sticker that says, Cleopatra sat on this chair in 1557. So that I know what I'm looking at, right? But then it ruins the curation thing. And so they're not really thinking about the experience of the customer. They're doing it for each other. And so that was one of the challenges they had at this museum, because it was government funded, was that government funding was getting cut. And so they needed to create things that customers would pay for in order to generate their own income now. So now, if you're in that situation, you can no longer curate for other curators with your funding guaranteed by somebody else. Now you have to curate for the actual paying person.
Wow, right? What a shift. What a shift.
And that's a shift that causes you to have to talk to people and understand why they don't enjoy the exhibitions. It's because I came, but now I have no idea what I'm looking at. And you won't tell me because you're saying it ruins the curation process or whatever. And so that's part of like the lessons learned, which is Again, having a great value proposition is not the same as having a great technology, is not the same as having a great value proposition.
And yet,
so that's lesson one.
Yeah, I mean, our leaders get so hooked on that. We often say here, Star Wars is not about the lightsaber. And the lightsaber is not the hero of the story. It's Luke Skywalker. He's the hero of the story, right? So we can't get hung up on it. And frankly, I often say, if we could have solved Luke Skywalker's problem with a tissue, we would have. But he needed the most incredible weapon ever invented in Hollywood. Fantastic. Still not the hero of the story. Right?
No, it's a good part of telling the story, but it's not the hero of the story.
So how do we get our leaders to prioritize the outcomes, right? The changes for the customer, rather than thinking about being able to go to a conference of industry leaders and saying, look what I built. Yeah. How do we get them excited about that shift?
So actually, I find that with leaders, it's easier than it is with innovation teams, which is surprising. And the reason why it's easier with leaders is because leaders always have the bottom line imperative.
Ah.
Right? So it's very easy. If you actually get them comfortable, they will open up and tell you, man, I know exactly what you mean. I had this team last year that promised me this of this technology and I lost money on it. Then I had another team that promised me this thing with this technology and I lost money on that. Then another thing with this team. Right? But when you go down to the innovation teams, do you know what they're saying? These leaders don't get it. They don't understand technology. They won't let me launch this tech thing. They don't understand that the world around them is changing. It's like, let's have a unified language about what our goals are. If you brought that technology, illustrated how it would create value for customers, that customers would be willing to pay for, you would be speaking the same language with the leadership.
That's right.
And you might get space to actually do the work, right?
How often do you get those innovation leaders into the field to talk to customers? Those teams.
They must.
They must.
Steve Blank is my favorite joke, which is software developers who are making software products must talk to the customers for whom they're developing the product. And he forces them to do it. And he says, after I'm done with them, the only difference between an introvert and an extrovert software developer is whether they're looking at their shoes or your shoes when they're talking to you. That's one of my favorite quotes from Steve Blank, because I remember being at a conference once, and I forget the speaker's name, and she was showing videos of people struggling with the UX of drop-down menus. But the audience was full of techies, right? And they were laughing.
At the customer.
At the customer struggling with these drop-down menus. And the lady wasn't even going to start lecturing them about all this, but she was just so pissed that they were laughing. And she was like, I'm surprised that you're laughing. What's the value of creating artifacts that people can't use to complete tasks?
Right.
Great. Are you doing it for each other's entertainment? Who's stupid? The person who created the artifact that nobody can use, or the person who can't use the artifact? What's the goal? And so it made everybody gulp a little bit, because I think they weren't expecting that from that speaker.
Yeah, it's fascinating because, and I love how you refer to it as artifact, as this anthropologist, right? Which also reminds us that it's going to be in a museum someday. It's not even necessarily here for all time. One of my favorite things to do is I'm a city girl like you. So I go to some countrified place for the weekend, and inevitably there's a small museum in town where they will exhibit old farm implements that used to be used on the farm. And I'm like, I have no idea what any of these things do. My kids picked up an egg beater, the kind that had,
my grandma used to use that.
Yeah. And then twirl it, and they just sat there doing this, and they're like, what kind of toy is this? They had no concept for what this machine did.
Yes.
It's kind of like when they're watching The Little Mermaid and she pulls out a fork and she's like, oh, it's a comb,
Yeah.
If our customer has no idea how to use the thing, what was the point in even building it?
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. Just as a hip hop fan, just a quick story for you is, first time I went to New York, I was actually in my 30s, and I was like, I have to go to Harlem and stand on 125th in front of the Apollo, right? And I just did that. I just went and stood there. again, it's like it was like an important hip hop iconic thing. But again, for me, it was like visiting a museum a little bit, right? So these things are evolving and changing all the time. And we have to embrace this idea that all these artifacts that we create, the ones that last longer are the ones that have the most use for people, right? Which speaks to, again, your initial example about how like 1,000 years later, these prophets still have people following their words. Well, because that stuff is universal. It feels the same, even if the world around us changes in terms of its utility for human beings and their lives and how they feel. And so, but where we're trying to go, it feels like a little bit like, artsy and very like, ooh, woohoo, for making products. But products are just, the most useful products are an expression of human need.
That's right.
And what human beings need to solve in their lives. And the most universal products, or at least even the ones that become obsolete over time, but are legendary, like the cassette tape, are still things that we remember for making break beats with, or recording the new Biggie Smalls album with, and running around with it in your car, or whatever it is, right? So these are all important ways of really learning how to make things for human beings.
So how do we, that getting back to that idea that you raised earlier about the variegation that happens in corporations, we call it silos, we call it this. Some companies decide to put their innovation center on a hill and isolate it from the detractors while they're coming up with the great ideas. I talked to a product manager at Spotify who said, "What's innovation?" And I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "I'm the product manager. If I'm not innovating my product every day, then what am I doing here?
Yeah.
It's not good enough for me to just have a product." And I was like, "Well, congratulations to you and your 15-year-old company. But some of our other friends who have 600,000 employees around the world may actually need a time and space away from the quarterly status quo." I love this idea of it being part and parcel, but after a while, it becomes untenable for someone to manage a global product and think 10 years down the road about what could come next.
Yeah, absolutely. And I work a lot with those innovation labs and help them set up their processes. And I always say, yeah, it's okay. You've got the innovation lab. You're on a hill. You didn't work on your own. What is your bridge to the mothership? Like, who's responsible for managing the bridge to the core?
And who should that be? Is that a chief innovation officer who takes that responsibility, who has a
chief innovation officer? Yeah. Alex also has got a concept that goes to chief ambassador, like a senior exec who's seasoned, who knows the business and can knock down bridges and negotiate resources for you and provide you with cover. Or, they're about to retire in the next 5 years, so they don't really have career ambitions. They're really just trying to help the company do better. It goes with a chief ambassador. We've worked with a couple of those that can help the chief innovation officer navigate. The chief innovation officer might be younger, brought in for the innovation talent. So they might need that sort of more senior person to sort of like a Sherpa, if you want, to help them navigate the internal politics of the larger company.
That's amazing.
Yeah, a lot of people believe that once they have the innovation lab, that's sufficient, that the company will embrace whatever they create there. And the reality is, like every history story will tell you that Xerox could not embrace what Xerox PARC was doing, right? Just several examples of that. It's a really great book about how Xerox fumbled the future. I can't remember who wrote it, but they fumbled the future to Steve Jobs, who understood, seeing their technology, what it could do. But it was their lab. Kodak,
I'm just going to take this mouse. You won't miss it.
You won't miss it. Here's 10,000. Here's 10,000 Apple shares. So it is that bridge to the core that really, really matters. And we have an assessment tool that we use at Strategyzer called Innovation Culture Assessment. And one of the sections of that is bridge to the core. And we assess to what extent innovators have access to the core team's resources. And Alex also has got a really great quote. It says, innovation teams in large corporations that don't have a great bridge to the core are like startups in chains. They don't have any of the benefits of being a startup, which is independence to do whatever you like because they work in a core company. But they also don't have the benefits of access to customers and access to scale and access to resources that you should get when you're working with a large organization. Right? Another great book, Kai Krippendorf, a book called Innovation from Within, really great book. And inside there, he tells a story about the head of innovation at Nike. They were responsible for the fuel ban. I forget his name now. Hobie something. But he says that, part of the job of innovation in a large corporate is lining up all the cannons. To line up the cannon of legal and compliance, I believe that some of the cannons are probably pointing at you as well. So you have to turn them around and make them face the right direction.
Right.
Yeah. And then, but the benefit of it is if you successfully line up all the cannons, when you let them go, you got this bang that startups just sort of wish they had the resources that corporate startups have. But the hard thing is that you trade those access to all that potential for the politics. All right. And so people often ask me, I'm kind of rambling on, but I'm quite passionate about this, right? People often ask me, what's the number one skill of the corporate innovator? And I often say to them, it is not the ability to innovate, it is political acumen. Because that is the thing that gets you to get the benefits of being a startup inside a large organization.
Yeah. And I would layer on the chief skill of being that political animal as being a phenomenal storyteller. Because you actually have the product in hand, all you have are the words. All you have as the prophet inside sharing the word. And so if we tell a story that isn't cultivated for very specific audiences in very specific time and places, then we lose the opportunities. And we sometimes lose the resources or the runway or the recognition if we don't lay the groundwork with the right stories.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I think product leadership or innovation leadership is inside organizations. It's ultimately storytelling. And that's how you bring people, on board with your movement.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so many things I want to ask you there about how this storytelling process works in big companies, but we're getting to the top of the hour and I want to be cognizant of your time. But I always ask guests on the show a couple of very pointed hot seat questions about innovation. Yeah. So
are you on the hot seat just standing like me?
You're on the hot seat right now, Tendayi. You're also in another hemisphere where it's way hotter than it is where we are right now. It's snowing. So if you had the opportunity to join any innovation team throughout history, right? From the beginning of human existence till now, what's the innovation team you would have liked to have been on?
For me, I think Bell Labs.
Yes. And what particular innovation from Bell Labs would have made you happy to work?
I don't know. Silicon. And then just follow them to Silicon Valley and and then maybe I'd like to be part of the Trader 8 as well and sell them out and start Intel.
Ooh, I'll be a real pirate. Look at you.
Exactly.
That's right. We're leaving the Navy. Here we go.
Team. Yeah. But Bell Labs is fascinating for me because I think a lot of the principles we use now were kind of tried and tested there. That's
true. An innovation that you wish you could see. What is something that irritates the heck out of you? That wow, I wish somebody would change X. I wish someone would innovate Y. What would that be?
That's a real hot seat question. I can't think of anything off the top of my head, which is weird because I work in innovation all the time.
Yeah. I asked my 94-year-old mom what she said. And I said, what would you want to see? She said, nothing. They invented the Tide Pod and I'm just happy now. I don't need anything else.
The Tide Pod. I love that.
That's all she needed was the Tide Pod. Her life is complete. Having watched 94 years of innovation history go by, Tide Pod.
Do you know what I would like invented? The thing I hate the most, grooming. I would like permanent groom. So if you cut your hair, that's it. You're done for a year or something like that. And it stays the same. And if you shave, it stays the same. And then maybe you push a button or something. If you want, because I just can you stop my nails from growing? Things like that.
You'd like to put the kibosh on human processes entirely. Is that it? You'd like to suspend human processes for a while?
No, just the grooming ones. Everything else is okay.
Well, a lot of people would follow you down that road to your athleticism, your weight management, your health, right?
That's true.
We'd love to hit pause and keep ourselves in an optimal state, whatever that may be.
Take a pill and never have to go to the gym. That's the one.
Yes. We have that pill. It's called wine. It will stop you from going to the gym every time.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I couldn't think of anything much more fascinating. I seem to be very satisfied with life at the moment, I think, from a technology standpoint.
What about your favorite innovation of all time? What is the tool or product that you've used in your life that makes you go, this is so amazing? Beyond the Tide Pod.
The internet.
The internet. The
Yeah.
giant internet. And are you excited about Web3? What's coming next?
We'll see.
Like, here we go, back into tools. Let's go.
Exactly. I mean, we'll see, right? I saw like people fighting about it online and blocking each other, like prominent innovators like Mark Andreessen and what's his name? Jack Dorsey.
Yes. Why are they blocking one another? What is that about?
I don't know. I think Jack Dorsey made a comment about Web3 and what it is and what it isn't. And it upset Mark Andreessen, and then he got blocked. I think that's what happened. I'm not afraid of the facts.
I think you're right. I think I remember reading an article that basically Jack Dorsey was saying that Web3 was going to be this whole new opportunity for people to capitalize on the web and et cetera. And when in actuality, it's the Facebooks and Twitters of the world who are trying to put their arms around Web3, and they want to own Web3 now that they're done owning Web2, because they're realizing they're going to be left out of that if they don't. Yeah. It's all about this struggle, right, of power and the person, right? The individual versus the power structure that says, okay, where's my stake in the technology now?
Yeah. Crazy.
Tendayi, thank you so much for joining me for round 2. I know we had a lot of people who wanted to hear more from you, so I'm just very grateful for the opportunity to talk with you again. And so incredibly jealous that you are in such a beautiful place like Zimbabwe right now while it is snowing in New York City.
Sorry, it never snows here.
It never snows there. That's right.
Yeah. Cool.
Thank you so much. So where can people find you, Tendayi, and your lovely books?
TendayiViki.com. That's the best place to find me. Yeah.
And also Strategyzer if you need help with incredible processes to get your innovation process either off the ground or refined, and even better if you're a corporate innovator. Thank you so much, Tendayi.
Thank you, Susan.
Now you might be asking, Susan, why innovation storytelling? Well, the truth is that an innovation story told well not only breaks down communication barriers so you can drive change and new growth, but it also helps other people remember and champion your work. And it propels your best ideas forward faster to secure you the runway, resources, and recognition you so richly deserve. In other words, stories are memory-making devices that significantly reduce the time it takes for you and your innovation to be understood. But like many leaders, you probably never got the memo that storytelling skills would be central to your success. Well, I've got some good news for you. It's not too late, because I've got you covered. Whether you need an expert to come and speak to your innovation leaders, you need training in the art and method of innovation storytelling, or you just need the support and guidance of a consultant who can get you where you want to go in less time, visit www.susanlinder.com today to learn more and to set up a call to discuss your needs. I'm so looking forward to connecting with you and to helping you tell a great innovation story. If you liked what you heard so far, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another episode. And leave us a comment. Tell us what you think of this episode. We'd love to hear from you. And if you didn't like what you've heard, just forget everything I've said.